E-Africa.
E-Africa. E-Africa. Welcome to the Omali Weekly Political Study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. We are continuing the special edition of this study as Chairman Omali Yeshitela will be reading Chapter 6 from the Political Report to the 7th Congress, titled The Regional Strategy, Putting Power into Practice. Chairman Omali Yeshitela will be reading Chapter 6 live today in St. Louis to start off the day before Day 2 of the Black is Back Coalition's annual conference. So Chapter 6, in terms of what we're going to be reading about, and the regional strategy, putting dual power into practice. You know, we look at the Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party, who is the only organization today that has manifested practical revolutionary work in the form of all the institutions that we have around the world. And going into the 7th Congress and the way forward for our party is to build the regional committees, build the regional structures of our party in order to bring dual and contending power and build upon that in the different regions. Building the party regions means building economic hubs for the African People's Socialist Party, where Deputy Chair Omali Yeshitela, who is responsible for all the economic development work within our party, will go into each region and shore up the economic work, but it's based on what happens politically in these communities, consolidating and all the organizing we do in the colony within the U.S. And we're focusing, really zoning in on 4 regions, which is the southern region that houses the Uhuru House, the Uhuru Foods and Pies right there in the city of St. Pete, Tyrone Lewis Community Gym and Wellness Center, Black Power 96.3 FM radio station, the distribution of the Burning Spear happening, and also Zenzele Consignment in Huntsville, Alabama, all a part of the southern region. We look at the Midwest region, which all the economic work that's happened here within the past year that houses the Uhuru House in St. Louis, which we're currently standing in now, which will home the Uhuru Jiko Commercial Kitchen and Bakery Cafe, which will also house the African Independence Workforce Program. It'll also be home to the One Africa, One Nation Marketplace right across the street from the Uhuru House, and that's all within the Midwest region. Then we look at the West Coast region, where our party has its longest history, the oldest Uhuru House, the biggest Uhuru Foods and Pies franchise, and also the Uhuru Furniture Store and Collectibles. And then we go into the Northeast region, where we have Uhuru Furniture and Collectibles, as well as the One Africa, One Nation Marketplace. So we see the economic and political work happening that has been combined, you know, because Chairman has always put out that, you know, all politics is concentrated economics, and the African People's Socialist Party is the only organization that has materialized that practically. And building organizing within these colonized communities, colonized African communities, and building the African People's Socialist Party maintains those economic institutions and builds those from the ground up. When we look at Chapter 6, we'll also be talking about how the Black Power Blueprint unites politics and economics within the U.S. Midwest region, how export-import business will spread African revolutionary culture and anti-colonial economy. We'll be talking about buying Black power, because it's not just enough to, buy from Black businesses that are, we know that some of those business owners are part of the petty bourgeoisie, constantly attack the African community, but also buying Black power, just buying Black, feeding into parasitic capitalism when it does nothing to benefit the community and it's not tied to revolutionary strategy, we know does not work. We're talking about buying Black power and building our own independent African economy. And we're also talking about the work that has to happen within these regions, what kind of organizing, and a part of that organizing strategy is to build our mass organization, the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, building these political hubs, NPDM opening local offices all throughout this country where Africans will come, be able to purchase all of our party's merchandise, and be able to come into political life. We will be able to meet African people at their front door, wherever it is they're at, because we'll be in each one of these colonies within the U.S. So that is what Chapter 6 is going to be talking about today. Chairman Omali Yeshitela is going to be going through Chapter 6 with us, and at the end we will have question and answer, very thorough question question and answer. So please, if you're in the audience, prepare your questions. If you're on the live stream, prepare your questions. We ask that they please pertain to Chapter 6, because any of your questions that don't pertain to Chapter 6 will most likely be answered throughout the rest of the throughout the political report, or have been answered prior. So we ask you to ask questions specifically around Chapter 6, again titled The Regional Strategy, Putting Dual Power into Practice. So without further ado, I turn it over to Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Uhuru, comrades. Our struggle against colonial capitalism must be rooted in the actual colonized territories that we occupy. This is the essence of dual and contending power. The victory of our party will come as a consequence of our success in transforming every colonized African community into a conscious, active opponent of colonialism. Take organization and ideological development to the heart of the African working class communities where the colonial contradictions are concentrated. The reality of our theory of dual power will be made more obvious in this regional strategy that we must implement coming out of our 7th Congress. In the political report to the party's 2017 plenary, we began the discussion of the need for our regional work to function properly as a critical vehicle for the development of the party and implementation of our political agenda. Addressing the need for the party to fight for our regional structure, the political report declared, and I quote, "The leadership of our regional work based on the organizational structure of the national party is something that has not been vigorously fought for within our party. Again, this is due in part to the limitations of our party's national secretary general. Nevertheless, the responsibility for leadership of the party's regional work falls squarely on the shoulders of the regional leaders themselves. Going forward, the party must require a dedicated and demonstrably strict adherence to party building by the regional leaders, all of them, all of the time. There are organizational manuals and organizational principles that must dominate the approach to this work and must be fought for in the strongest possible way. On a practical level, we know the efficacy of our regional leadership by the number of cities and states that have the party's presence. Our membership growth must reflect the numbers of the party's journal, The Burning Spear, sold monthly. The regional work must be reflected in the quantity and quality of regional participation in the party's work and institutions. It will no longer be allowable for party organizations to exist in name only. We must see growth and development. What is the quantity and quality of our membership? These are critical questions every committee or organizational leader will have to answer in order to validate their position and to continue in positions of leadership. How can we explain, especially now, when the people are actually clamoring for our organization and resistance, why we have not grown our organizations and committees after years of existence? What other practical means of measuring our regional work is applicable? This is even more important than our plans of action, which are meaningless if they are not actually used to guide practical work that we actually carry out. Practice is primary. As fast as our party is growing already, the development of our regional work and the presence of genuine regional leadership operating within the party structures would provide our people and our revolution with the army of cadre necessary to overturn our relationship with colonial capitalism forever." Unquote. In the 2017 political report, we addressed the need for attention to be given to the regional structure of the party as the strategic foundation for developing the African People's Socialist Party within the U.S. and other areas of national party work in other countries. The regional structures must create organizational hubs from which party growth and organization radiates. For example, our European Regional Committee, currently led by Comrade Makta Johannes from Sweden, has the responsibility for organizing the African People's Socialist Party, Sweden. It is also responsible for organizing, building, and leading the National Party, or Front, in the United Kingdom, France, Belgium, Finland, the Netherlands, Norway, and all over Europe. Similarly, the Caribbean Regional Committee is not only responsible for building and leading the African People's Socialist Party in the Bahamas, but throughout the entire Caribbean region. Continental Africa has also been divided up into geographical regions for the development and leadership of the different fronts of the party existing within the various colonially defined ill-formed territorial states. The various regional committees provide the infrastructure for building and leading the party all over the world. Regional leadership assumes the responsibility for spreading the party ideologically, making African internationalism the guiding worldview for the African masses within the region. The regional leadership puts the party on the ground in the various neo-colonial state territories and spreads the party in organizations throughout every village, city, and province. Coming up for a vote in this 7th Congress is the restructuring and reduction of the number of party regions within current borders of the U.S. Formerly, our regional territories included the Southeast, Southwest, Northeast, Northwest, West Coast, and Midwestern U.S. Because some regions have a negligible African population within huge territories, we believe that our organizational and political work would be best served if we limited our regional designations to 4: Northern, Southern, West Coast, and Midwestern. However, too much of the regional party work occurs without an overall plan. This must change, and we must begin to view our regional work differently moving forward. Henceforth, each region must be recognized as a political, economic hub of our party. Our regional political work must be forwarded as a manifestation of the economic trajectory of our party toward self-determination. In other words, our political work is the anti-colonial representation of the struggle against economic dependency, the essential component of colonialism. In other words, our political work is the anti-colonial representation of the struggle against economic dependency, the essential component of colonialism. These regional political economic hubs must inform our recruitment and membership drives and party assignments. Our basic recruitment targets remain the same as laid out in the political report in the past 2 Congresses: African women, labor, students, and prisoners. We must now be conscious of a real need to recruit and assign forces within the regions to facilitate the economic development, political promotion, and protection of the institutions of our party and movement. The economic component of the regional hubs of the party operating under the leadership of Deputy Chair Omali Yeshitela, whose office is responsible for all our economic work, would have the responsibility for building the party's regional economic presence. Each of the party's regions must become custodians of the economic strategy of the party for advancing the critical component of the anti-colonial struggle for self-reliance. Each of the regions would have the assignments of building the party's economic work within its designated area of responsibility. In addition to the political work implicit in their presence, all our Uhuru houses must become economic outlets for all the products from our related enterprises. Currently, most of the party's economic work is consolidated in specific institutions within the 4 regions being considered. The oldest Uhuru House Community Organizing Center is located in Oakland, California, in the Western region. Oakland is also the location of the Uhuru Furniture and Collectibles and Uhuru Foods and Pies, 2 of our most successful economic enterprises that have been in place for 3 decades or more. Our economic institutions are also regular features at markets and fairs throughout the Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area. St. Petersburg, Florida, in the southern region, is also home to an Uhuru House and Uhuru Jiko, a commercial community kitchen that functions as an incubator for community enterprises. The Tyrone Lewis Gym is also in St. Petersburg. Uhuru Foods and Pies has been a successful, long-time, and highly respected participant in local markets there. The southern region is also home to the Zenzele Consignment Shop, an economic institution operated by the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project in Huntsville, Alabama. Uhuru Furniture and Collectibles and the One Africa, One Nation Marketplace are two important economic institutions in Philadelphia, in the northern region. In fact, Uhuru Furniture has been an economic and political fixture in the region for 25 years or more. All of these institutions provide some employment and income to Africans within our respective regions. For example, in Philadelphia alone, scores of Africans have been able to create successful businesses from vending at the One Africa, One Nation Marketplace. When including the numbers of Africans benefiting from their relationship to our economic institutions in Florida, they probably amount to many more in business, many more in business creation and employment. Our economic enterprises are also anti-colonial political institutions that constantly win practical support for the issues confronting the international African community, especially those of reparations and anti-colonial economic development. I really just want to comment on that because I'm not sure how many people understand the economic work that we do. We have said, and it is true, that politics is simply concentrated economics. The problem, however, is that most Africans either do not have economics or do not project solutions to the contradictions that Africans confronted with that will result in economic control, economic development, self-reliance. And so there's all kind of political actions and discussions, et cetera, but they don't require any kind of economic development or institutions because there's not assumed that African people will actually be self-reliant, will be self-governing, will be in control of our own affairs. And we have run into, in fact, I was told within the last couple of days of how some white left organization says that we are black capitalists because we develop these economic institutions. Well, that's absurd from a number of reasons. Not the least of which is the fact that that statement somehow suggests that economic institutions and enterprise only exist within a capitalist society. Like somehow socialism does not require people to be able to feed and clothe and house themselves, which is stupid. The fact is that socialism is that time and place in history where the African working class has actually become the owners who own and the people who own and control the means of production. It's not like production doesn't happen. The question is who controls the means of production, who owns the means of production, whether it's the bourgeoisie, whether it's a handful of forces that own and control the means of production for the purpose of creating capital, or whether the working class has come into power and now becomes the owners and controllers of the means of production. That's what socialism is. It is not working like Bernie Sanders suggests, that one day you can maybe get $15 an hour. Socialism is when the workers determine who's going to get what, including Bernie. So this is the real struggle that we're involved in. And the question of dual power is the actual organizing to construct the future even while you're living in this situation right now. Practical construction which contributes to the actual unfolding of the revolution. We are constantly reminded of the significance of these institutions. They are a concrete manifestation of our theory, and their implementation under the leadership of Deputy Chair's office is an important example of the unity between the political and economic. Now, the party truism that politics is simply concentrated economics must be better understood and more consciously reflected in every aspect of our work. And there's a reason that Africans are attracted to organizations and have been historically that are involved in creating economic self-reliance, whether that's the old Nation of Islam, whether that's the Marcus Garvey movement. Africans have always, because there's an implicit assumption that if you can't feed, clothe, and house yourself, that you're always going to be trapped by some other force. The contest that we are involved in is who will be actually leading the movement to feed, clothe, and house ourselves, whether it will be the Negro politicians who claim to represent us here or someplace else around the world, or whether the African working class, under its own revolutionary leadership, will come into control of the capacity to feed, clothe, and house ourselves and actually struggle successfully to acquire state power. That's the struggle that we're involved in. It's concrete, it's real. And it's disturbing too. And so you got whites from the colonizer nation. Here are the colonizers whose children eat on tables filled with food that come from the colonized labor and resources, telling the colonized that you're the bourgeoisie because you are trying to create a capacity to feed, clothe, and house yourself. It's an absurdity, and I'm offended by it. We must build all our work, beginning with the regions, as reflections of our intent to seize control of the productive forces of the cruelly oppressed and exploited, colonized African nation. This is what is meant by the total liberation of Africa and African people worldwide. This is what is meant ultimately by winning self-determination. This is what is meant by the adage that there is no political self-determination without economic self-reliance. There is no political self-determination without economic self-reliance, nowhere. And if you look all across the African world and see black people who are supposed to be free, who are supposed to have some kind of political self-determination, and the white man, the colonizer, or the Chinese, or the Indians, or the Turks, or somebody else controls the economy. You can't even go to the continent of Africa and find an African-owned supermarket. All over Africa, you will see it's the Lebanese or somebody else owns the supermarkets. And that's the most ridiculous thing, because the African petty bourgeoisie, the neo-colonial puppets, the ones who got all the money that they're stealing from the oppressed, that the bourgeoisie, the imperialist powers will allow them to take the cut that they can get. They don't build a supermarket. They go to the Lebanese and they don't build hospitals, because when they get sick, they go to Paris, they go to Saudi Arabia, they go someplace else. And the Africans have no hospitals, no supermarkets, nothing. Because somebody else owns and controls those resources. Damn it, we intend to get them and put them in the possession of the African working class. Our political objective our political objective to liberate Africa and African people is a statement of our intent to achieve the economic capacity to create and recreate real life. Our political objective to liberate Africa and African people is a statement of our intent to achieve the economic capacity to create and recreate real life, something that cannot happen as long as Africa and Africans are forced to endure colonial captivity by foreign and alien powers, colonialism. The leadership for all our work is located within the Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party. The party will now confer legitimacy on the regional structures and work by learning to successfully integrate the work of the entire Central Committee to that end. Up to now, the party's regional work has occurred in a vacuum of sorts. with an inferred assumption that the success of that work depended solely on the respective leading regional committees. However, every regional leader sits on the party's central committee that is responsible for carrying out the mandates from our congresses and planning much of our work. This helps us to understand that regional party work is part and parcel of our international work. The Secretary General also sits on our Central Committee, along with the Deputy Chair who leads the party's economic work. All the leaders of our mass work, NPDOM, NWO, APDEP, etc., also occupy seats on the Central Committee. Along with the departments of agitation and propaganda, headquarters of the production and distribution of party ideology, the regional leaders and other Central Committee members are key to how the party's integration of human and material resources will be achieved under the leadership of the chair. With the strategy of turning the regions into political and economic hubs, we will see the exponential leap in the production and distribution of party and party-related economic products and influence. Similarly, the production and mass distribution of the party's theory, especially through the burning spear, will make a major leap forward. The success of the party's regional work will depend on the success of each regional leader and committee. This is where the leadership to build local party organizations and offices will be concentrated. Much of the party's recruitment efforts will also be brought down to earth within the local party organizations and offices that must be built in every colonized community within the African nation. Currently, the economic work we are most involved in promoting is the Black Power Blueprint. This is a major economic project that has brought inspiration to Africans throughout the U.S. and elsewhere. In a short period of time, a matter of months, Comrade Deputy Chair Omali Yeshitela has driven this project, most often from the construction sites themselves. In the thick of dirt and dust and torrid, sometimes suffocating heat of St. Louis summer without air conditioning, and during the cruel, numbing cold of winter and temperatures that are often below freezing. This is really kind of understatement of what has happened in terms of this work, where it really is. I mean, among other things, Deputy Chair Omali was a construction worker here. I mean, among other things. And under really severe circumstances, there was no floor, there was nothing here. People don't know what I'm talking about. And it was even difficult to sweep up and stuff because of the amount of dust and debris that one was subject to. There was no toilets here. And she had to find a way to make that work. But there was no stopping it. Because the thing that's really striking, one of the things that's really striking about this project is not just what I think is the quality of what we see here that has been brought for the African working class, but the speed in which this has happened. I mean, this thing, and everybody has commented on it. How the hell did you do it so quickly? I mean, this is a project that could still be going on from a time. I mean, they're supposed to take months and months, but it came and was done so quickly, so rapidly, as if not only, I mean, somebody who has experience doing this stuff, but never was a contractor, never organized contraction, never was a construction worker or anything like that. But it's a statement, in my view, also, of what the class can do when it recognizes what is in its interest. It's a statement of what the class can do. You know, and yeah, it's remarkable, and it's more than that. And I find one of the, you know, sometime soon, I'm suggesting that people will be able to recognize the influence of the African People's Socialist Party on the revolutionary trajectory, not only in this country but around the world. Because part of what we do, we'll say a little bit about it. We're doing in other places around the world where African people are located. But you think about this. For years and years and years, people in our community have talked about reparations. And then they say, well, how are we going to get it? And if we get it, who gets it, et cetera, et cetera. That's what the discussion is always. But we're not just talking about something, even though we said it. We said that we're going to make reparations in 1980. We said we're going to make reparations a household word. That's what we said, that this is going to be something that's known by Africans. We began constructing things like tribunals, the first world tribunal on reparations, to make it a mass thing, not just something by Africans with briefcases following around legislators or going to courtrooms and hoping to get somebody. The people. Once the people are convinced that we are due reparations, reparations will happen. And in the final analysis, reparations is a consequence of the African working class coming to power, taking it all. In the final analysis, that's what it's about. But you say, well, how do we say who gonna get it? You know, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we've been getting reparations now for years. And this is a product of reparations that we see that we're living in. And not only that, but the thing about it is that every institution that we own, go to one of our institutions, and what you will find in the white community, promotion of reparations, tell white people that you can have unity through reparations. We put it on the ballot. We actually ran campaigns where we had hundreds of white people marching behind Comrade Akile through the lily white streets of St. Petersburg, Florida, going unity through reparations, and people coming out of clubs and sidewalk cafes and stuff like that, shaking their hands. White people doing this. The thing is that we are not just some kind of black nationalists who make the assumption that African people exist in some kind of vacuum. We live in the world. African internationalism is a theory of the world. It's not just a theory of black people. How in the hell can you have just a theory of black people? Africans exist in the world. We have African internationalism gives us a theory of the world from the vantage point, from the location in history and geography and time of the African people ourselves, and from the viewpoint of the African working class. So when the wars opposing reparations, the actual stuff that's happening to transform the world that we live in is occurring right now under the leadership of the party. You wake up one day and somebody open the door and say, reparations is not just going to be because some sudden, some immediate thing happened. It's quantitative struggle resulting in qualitative transformation. That's what we're talking about. The work that we do, that's who we are. That's what the African People's Socialist Party is all about. And if you can't have the long view, you can't see it. If the only thing that you're interested in is the next demonstration or closing down the next highway for 15 minutes, you can't see it. The thing is not closing down the white man's highway, but having your own damn highway. You know, that's the struggle that we're fighting for. If you have your own white highway, if you get the capacity to develop your own white highway, then the white man can't have highways except coming through you, because the one he's got, he stole it from Africa and African people. That's the thing that we have to understand. That's the thing that African internationalism teaches us, that the wealth and resources that we see in the white world was not conferred upon the white world by Jesus or some other thing. It's stolen from slavery, from colonialism. When they open their refrigerator and to get food for their babies, it's food that's coming from your babies that they see when they go there. That's why we have to have, that's why they're in your community every day with the police. That's why they have military forces all over the continent of Africa, even as we have this discussion, which makes so ridiculous this whole notion that we can't be looking at them people over there, talking about other Africans, right? Because we just have to take care of ourselves over here. It's the most ridiculous thing, but I understand. If people are ill-informed, some people have never left. One of the things that you find out in the whole African world, there are people who never even leave their villages. There are people who live in Oakland, California, and spend most of their time in West Oakland and never go to East Oakland. There are people who've never been 40, 50 years old, who've never been on airplanes before. Africans, right? Who never gone, out the south or this place or that place, because they have placed all kinds of impediments on our movements. So people are limited often in terms of how they understand the world. And that's part of what we have to take on as the African worker, the revolutionary, the advanced detachment, the general staff of the African Revolution. Our responsibility is to raise up the African working class to its full stature. When the African working class stands up to its full stature, nothing can block it, nothing can stop it. And you see this happening look, how many years after slavery? What they call it, Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That was in what, 1920? 1921. Slavery formally ended in 1865. How many years? Come on, there's somebody who understands math without getting. How many years? 60 years? 56 years. 56 years after slavery, we got skyscrapers, feeding and clothing. That's in Tulsa, Oklahoma. What the hell are you talking about? We can't do it. You understand? It's the African petty bourgeoisie who stands in our way. But you have to be able to believe it yourselves, brothers and sisters. You have to be able to believe it. And that's why this whole minority politic that we get pumped into us, that somehow we became a Negro American, Afro-American, a new African, or some other thing that, is crazy, because it limits our ability to see a future, because you're always a minority. You can't even fight. People, I can't fight this guy. There's only 16 of us. Hell, you have 1.5 billion African people who don't even know who we are. You have minority consciousness. That's what African internationalism frees us from, that, not just conceptually, it frees us from that organizationally, so that the African People's Socialist Party has created the African Socialist International with revolutionary African forces all around the planet Earth, and trying to get every place where we are not even existing now. We want to be everywhere, right? So anyway, I got to move forward. So politically, I'm on page 124. Politically, the party has built a meaningful presence since the 2014 assassination of 18-year-old Mike Brown and subsequent generalized resistance of the African working class. The African People's Socialist Party has been the only revolutionary organization of the African working class in St. Louis. I could stop there. But the African People's Socialist Party has been the only revolutionary organization of African working class in St. Louis to have built an independent political presence to further the liberation of our people from the colonial chokehold that starves us of resources and freedom. Nobody should be offended by that. I mean this literally, because who claims to be a revolutionary organization of the African working class in St. Louis or St. Petersburg or Florida or St. Petersburg, Russia, for that matter? Who claims that? Who even claims that? You understand? It's not even something that somebody's claiming. I mean, people are still running from the more than 40-year defeat, vicious attack on the African Revolution, and to claim to be a revolutionary. That's not even, there's no contest there, The headquarters of NPDOM is now located in St. Louis, where its president, Comrade Kalambayi Andernet, was born and raised. Comrade Kalambayi, new to our party and to political life, has brought with her the spirit of the African working class and exemplifies the leadership of real-life African women, as opposed to the airbrushed imitations offered up by the white ruling class and the African petty bourgeois collaborationists. Yeah? I say airbrushed imitations. You understand? And that is to recognize and understand that the African working class, we come with blemishes, contradictions. Hell yes we do. And none of it's airbrushed. None of it's covered over, and we don't try to cover it over. When we try to cover it up, we're messing up. I can't stand covering it up, because if you cover it over, you can't see the contradictions. One of the things that's happened is that they've got this stuff called high definition television today that is really astounding, because all them people you've been looking at all this time before, and you look at them now with high definition, but damn, you know, they've airbrushed it, right? So we are real live human beings, and that's the thing that really must be understood. Ain't gonna be no, what's that place that they call what a magic Negro with the, what is it? Well, ain't no, we are real live human beings who once organized can bring this damn thing down and transform the entire world, not just some mythological place that nobody can find because of some mythological reason. The future can be ours. It can belong to us, but the African working class must be able to see that future and must be organized to win that future. The African People's Socialist Party has a real presence in the St. Louis Ferguson area, for real. That's the real deal. I mean, when we came here, I was being pushed off platforms. When we came here, there were there were more sellouts per square inch that came to the Ferguson to St. Louis area after Mike Brown was murdered than you could find any place on the planet Earth. And they were opposed to anything that looked like, hinted, revolutionary movement, revolutionary organization. Like I said, to the point where August 30th, I won't forget it. They won't forget it. Where, you know, in front of thousands of people, you know, and where I was supposed to speak, and I was there maybe just a few seconds, and revolution came out of my mouth. They actually bum rushed me off the platform. Now we own the platform. Yeah. That's the African working class. African working class conscious of its own selfish interests as a class. As a class. Some people will say, well, there's no classes. You know, there's just black people and white people. You know who's saying that? The African petty bourgeoisie. Because the African petty bourgeoisie cannot gain one iota without the support of the African working class, but it wants to tell you that you don't exist. He's the one that exists, and what you're doing is to help him advance his interests. I say him, but you know, it's not that way anymore, because if you don't believe it, you know, you can find a thimble full of, you know, African female petty bourgeois forces too. I think they call that feminism or something. Yeah, you get beat to death with a pink billy club. That's something. By an African woman wearing a red, black, and green uniform. The African People's Socialist Party, the African People's Socialist Party has a real presence in St. Louis, Ferguson area. Our community meetings bring out regular people, children and high school students who have given their own twist to African internationalist politics, taking them to their neighborhoods and the colonial schools. Neo-colonial office holders who have handed over all the resources of our colonized communities to the bankers and white colonial rulers of the city have begun to create paltry imitations of our party programs. They have. They start talking about black power and blueprints, and it's amazing. It really is happening. They don't necessarily say them all together, but over here you get a little black power, and over here you get a few blueprints, etc. They are attempting to use the politic and economic success of the party and black power blueprint to endear themselves to our people. But they have a big problem. Politics is truly concentrated economics, and their politics ring hollow because they respond to the economic interests of the colonizer and not the colonized. Our economic project is aptly named Black Power Blueprint because self-reliance is key to self-determination, to the struggle against colonial subjugation. Ours is a blueprint that enthralls the entire colonized African population, a blueprint that is the possession of the much maligned African working class. And, you know, they like to talk all kind of nasty stuff about the African working class. They spend so much time. Listen, this is what should, if nothing else should help you to understand this question, it's the amount of slander that's imposed on the African working class. The good Negroes are the ones who embraced and held up, etc. It's the African working class, where all the pigs are. And even the African working class is often infused with the philosophy of the bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeoisie. We out here doing work in the community, knocking on doors, talking to starving African people, and you knock on the door and this little old lady say, are you going to be able to get the young people to start pulling up their pants? Woman, your problem ain't that the young people ain't pulling up their pants. I'm knocking on your door because these crackers coming here now, they taking every other thing that you think you got. And you concentrate on the African, right? So it's the African working class that's always under assault, always under assault, always under attack. You know, he did have a criminal record. This is why it is supported by skilled African workers. This is here, the Black Power Blueprint, who have been hired as contractors and who, because of their unity with the Black Power Blueprint, struggle to uplift the African community, go above and beyond what a paycheck could ever bring. I'm talking about these are African, they call themselves contractors. They were African skilled workers who they can't get no work no place else, right? And so, but they're skilled workers. And that's who came and worked on these buildings and what have you. And they lowered their prices and they even put money in the pot. Yep. They actually made contributions. The persons who did much of the work that we see around here actually made contributions to this project because they were won politically. Several of the contractors have given discounts on the cost of their labor and have even made financial contributions to the success of the projects that they are able to see represent their interests as African colonial subjects. The African contractors are beginning to see the vanguard. They, like the residents of the neighborhood associations whose meetings we attend, have been won to the Black Power Blueprint because of what it obviously brings to our community that has been suffering political and economic quarantine and deterioration. And, you know, some Africans, you know, especially so-called leaders in petty bourgeoisie, they are offended when we say that our community has suffered deterioration, etc. They see it as a reflection on them. That's not the intent. You won't find a place where Africans live in the world. It's not a St. Louis issue. It's a colonial question. And if you don't understand that, and many do not, which is why they cannot fight against colonialism, but that's what we confronted with every place. I was in Mississippi once, and I spoke at this event where those two women, you may think it was a mother and a daughter, two sisters, who had been given time in Mississippi. There was a big case around them. And I came and I spoke at this big rally in Jackson, Mississippi. And I talked bad about Mississippi. And because of how Mississippi has treated African people. I mean, Mississippi, you know, is not peculiar, except it had come to represent essentially the worst of what America's about in treatment of African people. And there were Africans who were offended that I talked like about Mississippi because they live in Mississippi, from Mississippi. You understand? And I couldn't, you know, I was shocked. They were really offended that I said stuff about Mississippi. I said, Mississippi killing black people, doing bad things. You talk about Mississippi like that. You understand? Please. It is the first glimpse of concrete development most have seen in ages. It is the only glimpse of concrete development that is initiated and led by the advanced detachment of the African working class anywhere in the world. In St. Louis, we have transformed the 9,000 square foot, three-story, formerly abandoned and once deteriorating community eyesore on a main thoroughfare into a model of development. It is the site of our latest Uhuru House and the center of much of the party's Midwest regional leadership. And I spoke highly of the role that Comrade Deputy Chair played here, but she didn't do that by herself. I mean, it's so great. I mean, there are comrades right here from St. Louis, born in St. Louis, grew up in St. Louis, lived in these communities and what have you, who were digging in and helping to make this thing successful. Couldn't have done it otherwise. In addition to the Uhuru House, we acquired 2 commercial buildings of similar size across the street from the center. These buildings were demolished, and along with the 2 other contiguous lots we have acquired, are being transformed into an event space, African Community Garden, and One Africa, One Nation Marketplace to address the cultural and material needs of this working class community. You have now, with the African Marketplace, this is going to be incredible because, you know, they talk about food deserts. Well, this is bringing water to the desert. We put this marketplace there where people can come in their own community and buy food and buy other things and sell food and other things. And so there's some element of resource circulation right in the African community, not everything just being shipped right out of the community. That's going to be fundamentally important. We have acquired other properties to further economic and political projects under the leadership of the African working class. Among them is a massive building that was once a boat dealership known as the Boat House on another major thoroughfare. This will become the site of Uhuru Bakery Cafe and the African Independence Workforce Program that will provide training and employment for Africans who prior captivity within the colonial prison system prevents them from being hired and trained elsewhere. We are practical revolutionaries. African internationalism is a theory of practice. We have always struggled to make concrete our goals and objectives. We do indeed constitute the advanced detachment, the vanguard and general staff of the African Revolution. Moving forward, we must use the economic and political base we have developed in the U.S. to enhance our regional work throughout the African world. The office of the Deputy Chair must give serious consideration to the establishment of an import-export enterprise that can begin with the import of African garments and fabrics directly from the African continent. And eventually we will be capable of establishing factories where we can design and construct our own clothing for exports to the U.S., Europe, the Caribbean, and even places like the Bahamas. When we talk about these export-import, we're talking about being able to create a situation where on the continent of Africa, we forces who are part of the party and our movement in Africa can create some employment and some influence among the African working class by creating these factories. When we say factories, we ain't necessarily even talking about a building this sophisticated. It starts in a very limited way where 5, 6, 7, 8 people with sewing machines, that's not easily available, and with patterns, can begin the process of creating these garments that we want, and can move those garments to other places where we are located and make resources there that can fund the work that we're trying to do there on the continent, and that allows us to be able to fund the work that we're trying to do here as a consequence of those garments. This is the kind of stuff that we're talking about, the same stuff that Garvey was trying to do some time ago. This enterprise can create economic development for party organizations in Africa, and the export of apparel and other accessories can lead to the creation of storefront economic operations in the colonized, economically dependent African communities in the U.S., Europe, the Caribbean, and elsewhere. Storefronts. We ain't talking about starting off, you know, like Macy's or some stuff like that. Storefront, right in the heart of the most oppressed sector of the African population. That's what we're talking about. Zenzele consignment in Huntsville, Alabama, and elsewhere it is established can supplement its inventory through this enterprise, as can Uzi Clothing, Infidum's Institution, and Decolonize, the African National Women's Organization Economic Front. We should be able to distribute our imported African garments, supplemented with accessories and other cultural and health-related products like shea butter, etc. Oil and incense, soaps, and related products are inexpensive and should not take too much overhead. This enterprise could offer resources to support our local work and evoke the spirit of self-reliance within our resource-starved, colonized communities right at the doorsteps of the people. Do you understand? West Africa will be the location for our export-import jump-off enterprise. Right now, Ghana appears to be the likeliest places, but there are other places in West Africa as well. I think our contacts and experience in Ghana favor it as the regional center for our West African work. From Ghana, we can embark on economic activity throughout the region, but I have to say, we've got an extraordinarily influential plan of action from Kenya and East Africa, from the comrade leading the work there. That includes an economic component. So we're looking at that possibility as well. I do not have a suggestion of what kind of economic activity we can develop in Southern Africa, although I do, really, now, since this has been written, but that's another story. That we'll say something about by the time we get to our Congress. The strength of our party work in occupied Tanzania, South Africa, demands that we establish a regional office there. Much of our work there we will have to be subsidized for a while. But I am confident that with consistent leadership, we will build a formidable organizational and political presence in this strategically important, critical location in Africa. I am confident that the unity of our party forces in occupied Tanzania will enable the party to develop the regional presence necessary for our mission. I can't overstate the significance of what they call South Africa. Because as you know, South Africa is one of the places where white people really intended to be there. They intended to stay. And with the support of the entire imperialist world, they developed incredible infrastructure as compared to other places in Africa. They have a certain industrial capacity as compared to they even had nuclear weapons. That they gave up when the white people let that Negro go to power. They had to turn over those nuclear weapons, but they had nuclear weapons there in South Africa. So it's a really important place for us, because when we begin to take power on the continent of Africa, it's going to be one of those places where that can really help us to rapidly industrialize the rest of Africa. Of course, the stuff we're going to be taking from here and other places is going to contribute to that as well. But to have that in that place in South Africa, and then there are other places, not with all the resources that you can find in South Africa on the continent as well. Some of them might be in what they call Zimbabwe, a little, and some in Nigeria, etc. But South Africa is really strategically significant for us. The party's political work in occupied Tanzania will be also informed by our determination to achieve economic independence and the actual capture of our existing resources. We must use all our creativity to develop other resources that are also linked to the struggle to build our party and revolutionary mission. We must struggle to achieve the ability to print the burning spear in occupied Tanzania. At the time of the writing of this political report, we were also studying the plan of action from our economic development work in Kenya and East Africa. At this time, the party's presence there appears to be growing in our organizational capacity under the leadership of a dynamic young woman who has accepted the overall strategy of our party to build an independent political capacity to seize the power, to make anti-colonial work successful in concert with the economic work of the entire African Socialist International. We must also make decisions about our economic front in Europe. We will have a market for African garments and accessories there, and possibly Uhuru foods and pies. Some of our garments could be produced in Europe for exports to the US and other markets. Additionally, we are intent on developing a market within the colony itself, developing a market within the colony itself, you see. This means that we will be constant evangelists of revolutionary African culture. The point is that we're not just trying to create a situation of export, that we are creating stuff for other people to purchase. We have to have a market inside our own community for its development. It means a number of things meant there. Of course, the community has to have resources in order to be able to utilize that market, but that contributes to development. If you have a situation like we do now, even if Africans get a job, building houses, building factories, or anything else, we leave our community to go build a house for somebody else, to build a factory for somebody else. It's not like having a job results in some kind of economic development for us, you see? So that's the thing that we want to deal with and have to deal with. And so we're talking about inside the African colony, right where we live, in the most oppressed sectors of our population, we have to create economic activity among the masses of our people that contributes to, that represent a front of the assault against colonialism, that helps every African person to participate in the struggle against colonialism, whether they're ready to pick up a pencil, a gun, or a needle and thread. The point is that much of the community as possible must be organized into an assault, a conscious assault on the colonial relationship that we have with imperialism. Many people misunderstand this whole question of anti-colonial and revolution and stuff like that. They think of it only as something that somebody's got a gun can do. But a conscious, mobilized African population, when the Vietnamese fought U.S. imperialism, it wasn't that everybody carried a gun. Some people pushed bicycles. The Vietnamese were so resourceful that there were instances where they actually moved a tank across a mountain. They disassembled a tank. They didn't want to be seen by the French and the others who have all this sophisticated capacity to spy on people. They dismantled a tank. They took it apart and put parts of it on bicycles, and they walked across the mountain with tanks on a bicycle, took it on the side they wanted to be, and put it back together, and then kicked the ass of the French. This is what we are talking about. We have to. These are people who may never have picked up a gun, but they pushed the bicycle. And the so-called Ho Chi Minh Trail that they could never find. The people who cut the paths over and over again. Every time they come and bomb and destroy the U.S. would come and bomb and destroy what they considered the path. There's the masses of the people. That's what the Vietnamese call people's war. So people's war doesn't just employ somebody with a gun. It's the whole people have to be brought into the struggle against colonialism. They have to be conscious opponents of colonialism. They have to be conscious opponents to anybody being in charge of our affairs and our lives other than ourselves. That's what has to be won in our communities. We will take the best of traditional African clothing and artifacts and give them the modern, youthful swag demanded by these times. The Uhuru swag will dissuade our young people from deserting our culture for popular cultural expressions that are usually designed by Africans under colonial labels. The African community will be won to a greater appreciation of our African national identity and revolutionary cultural expressions as exemplified by the clothing produced by this independent anti-colonial economic institution. That's what we're talking about, right? The Bahamas is a tourist designation. And we talked about this because at one time we were relatively good shape in the Bahamas, and I think we still have forces there. We say that it's a tourist designation, but there are relatively well-established marketplaces there, but few that provide Bahamian, as it's called, or African products. That means there are Africans in the Bahamas who actually go and bring back, what do you call these shipping things? These containers of stuff to sell in Bahamian markets to tourists who get off the boats that come from China. So we're saying that we can bring an African flair and flavor even to that. We say that learning from our colonial capitalists, we will buy from each other and sell to everyone. Our slogan will be Buy Black Power. This takes us beyond the petty bourgeois neo-colonialist demand for African people to buy black, which might profit them, but promises nothing to our people as a means of breaking out of the colonial prison we have inhabited for the last several centuries. Buy Black Power does not only serve to promote our movement products, but will encourage other merchants within our colony to promote and develop an anti-colonial commercial approach as well. See, the consciousness, I mean, even the petty bourgeoisie can be won to an anti-colonial stance, because the petty bourgeoisie is like a windshield wiper. They don't have an independent philosophy. Whatever it is, one day, what seems strongest, that's where they go. And what seems more beneficial today, that's where they go. That's why there was a comrade who, when he died, he was, Marxist revolutionary, but we've known him for a long time. We used to call him the windshield wiper because you didn't know who he was going to be next month. You understand? Because that's the way the petty bourgeoisie is. So we say that the office, and so the point is, though, that we can create a situation where it becomes economically necessary for the African petty bourgeoisie to cooperate with the community. Yeah. There was a time, even in this city, and even in a city like St. Petersburg, Florida, with a huge minority population there, Africans in that city. But there's a time where, under what they call segregation, where African people, people had their own grocery stores and dry cleaners and service stations, and even operated the white man's movie theater. There was a time when Africans had to rely on each other, when the African petty bourgeoisie had to rely on the African working class to feed his children, because that was the store. The workers, African workers coming to those stores, kept his ship afloat as well. But at the time when they destroyed all of that and then made the petty bourgeoisie an absolutely dependent petty bourgeoisie, so that most of them now, if they have a job, they work for the county, they work for the city, they work for the government, they're the school, they're working for this and that, or they employ, in some other fashion. Now they're spineless. The African petty bourgeoisie is spineless, and you can't find an ounce of patriotism to the African population that lasts more than 30 days at a time, because they don't have to rely on the African community for their survival. But we create a situation now where we win the African masses to what it is that we're talking about. Then the African petty bourgeoisie has to be influenced, because the African masses will not work with them, will not trade with them. They want somebody who's going to be allowing them to buy Black Power. They want to be able to want to the situation that I will go here because it's going to do something to enhance the struggle for freedom for our people. That's the message. That's the work that we have to do. So the office of the deputy chair must also examine the possibility, and I have to expedite this, of using the Uhuru houses and our local offices in each region within the U.S. and everywhere else possible as distribution points for our food products. This is especially true of Uhuru Foods and Pies. In other words, our economic activities will expand exponentially through utilization of these regional hubs and the initiation of local distribution points. These products for distribution must include shea butter from Anwo, clothing from Uzi, clothing from Zenzele Consignment, and Planet Uhuru apparel from the African People's Solidarity Committee. The Burning Spear newspaper and all our books, audio, and other visual products must also be distributed from these sites. The Office of the Deputy Chair will have the responsibility of providing overall leadership for all the economic activity outlined here. It must develop its own system of training and support for all the economic work and provide strategic direction leading to the creation of an independent, anti-colonial, international, socialist economy of liberated Africa and African people. We want to create independent economic activity that is not simply inspired by an aspiration of individual wealth, but that recognizes itself as a part of the struggle for self-determination. The Office of the Deputy Chair can begin training programs for Africans to initiate and participate in successful economic ventures as part of the overall anti-colonial economic work. Our Buy Black Power programs will help to inspire our community from its deepest, most oppressed and exploited sectors to political consciousness of self-reliance. This, along with all our community and neighborhood gardens, will begin the process of generalized self-initiated economic development on the terms of the people instead of the predatory colonial merchants, bankers, and their political minions. See, challenge the consciousness of the entire African community. We're doing this stuff. We're creating community gardens. You know, community garden, what is a community garden? It's a part of a process that we are initiating that wins African people. You create a community, you create one. African people can be won to the concept of actual self-reliance, self-determination through these projects right there in the communities that we are talking about. This is what has to happen because the African working class when we say the African petty bourgeoisie is not there, the African working class for a certain period looked to leadership for the African petty bourgeoisie. It does to some extent now when it pays any attention to them at all. But when they killed Panthers and they killed and destroyed revolutionary organizations on the ground, they left the people leaderless. Listen, one of my favorite people was a comrade named George Jackson. He was in prison, and in prison, he organized a formidable presence and actually challenged the consciousness of Africans in the whole prison system. I had comrades who came to our party who said, I'm a revolutionary criminal. You understand? But challenged the consciousness of people and until they killed George. When they killed George, then you saw these Africans, many of them resort back to the same kind of criminal behavior that's necessary to survive often in that system unless there's some other kind of leadership that's there to deal with that. We have to be everywhere. And we have to especially be among the African working class because that's our salvation. That's the salvation of the African nation for a number of reasons. Because if you can't feed, clothe, and house yourself, and ain't no banker going to do that for you. Ain't no insurance guy going to do that for you. The ones who create the food, clothing, and shelter, that's the African working class that just never benefits from it. Sometimes can't buy food for itself. Create the food and create the shelter, create the clothing, and can't afford it for itself. Again, our basic point here is that we must develop an approach to organization that is centered in the regions that will have the responsibility of emanating outward throughout the states, provinces, and cities with all our political and economic programs. This is not an approach designed to minimize what is normally considered our political work. This is a critical strategic approach to our political work, marrying it to the economic interests of the colonized African working class, marrying the political work to the economic interests of the colonized African working class, not just some abstract black people, right? Because when we abstract the African community through black people, we're talking about the African petty bourgeoisie. An African working class that's not conscious of its own selfish interests then is most often working in the interests of somebody else. And when it tries to work for its self-interest without being politically educated, it does it behind a 9mm and a bandana, sometimes in our own communities. You know what I'm saying? In the political struggle to be free, we are also preparing to govern. In the political struggle to be free, we are also preparing to govern in an economically independent, anti-colonial socialist world that we are actively constructing. That's what it's about. If you ain't fighting for power, what the hell are you fighting for? What is it all about if it's not for power? And we have to construct it. We have to fight it. And when we say we're planning to govern, some people might chuckle. We are planning to govern. That's the objective. That's the objective of the 16-year-old girl who works in our work here in St. Louis, out planning to govern. And if you're not planning to do that, what does it mean? That you're planning to be governed. You understand? And the African working class must reacquire the confidence in its own capacity to feed, clothe, house, and govern itself, and govern the entire African nation. Moving forward, these initial economic projects were developed to the point that we can grow other, more sophisticated economic activity that functions as a counterweight against gentrification and population displacement and as an engine for the defeat of colonial dependency. Our headquarters, working with our regions, will discover other opportunities for the kind of development currently exemplified by the Black Power Blueprint. Our One Africa, One Nation marketplaces can also be duplicated within each of the regions. Increasingly, we will be able to work with a strategy organized from our headquarters that will enhance our capacity for creating food, clothing, and shelter independent of the colonial capitalists. Buy Black Power campaigns will flourish as part of our Black Power Blueprint projects throughout the U.S. and other bases of operation throughout the world. This will be a demonstration of democratic centralism, democracy under centralized leadership employed throughout our organizational structures. Even in the arena of electoral politics, we will be capable of concretizing our political demands in support of the economic interests of our people, whether this is through anti-colonial politicians we may support or through our own candidates. The working class must have its own independent capacity. Our regional strategy concretizes this as nothing else we have ever done. The Office of the Secretary General must pay constant attention to recruitment and assignment of forces for the development of the regions under the leadership of the Central Committee and the Chairman. For example, while our presence in Oakland extends back to 1980, when the party was indisputably the primary political force there for many years, the African face of our party has been missing there for some time now. Uhuru Furniture and Collectibles and Uhuru Foods and Pies have been uninterrupted, successful enterprises since the 1980s. Their presence contributed to our political prestige in the area. We continue to promote and win support for our reparations work from these institutions. We also use them as platforms for promoting the various political campaigns our movement is always involved in pursuing. We must begin to strategically recruit and place cadre in Oakland in order to carry out our regional strategy. Similarly, recruitment and assignment must target Philadelphia, where we are working to assign party cadre to lead our highly successful Uhuru Furniture and Collectibles. A local party member has taken over direction of the One Africa, One Nation marketplace. The recruitment and deployment of Solidarity cadre will also have to submit to the overall plan of the party, including the regional strategy. In some ways, this is already happening. We have been able to reinforce some of our political work by assigning Solidarity forces to locations strategic to our progress. One such place is St. Petersburg, Florida, our national headquarters. Another is St. Louis, Missouri. We have also moved or kept Solidarity forces to shore up and reinforce our economic work when necessary. Now, our regional strategy gives us the best process for strategic recruitment and deployment of Solidarity forces. The Solidarity movement is also recruiting in locations where the party is not currently located. In some instances, this will mean we will simply utilize these forces to deepen our reparations work according to already developed plans. We will also doubtlessly develop other tasks for Solidarity forces in these locations along with party and NP development in those areas. We have significant economic institutions in Philadelphia and Oakland in which Solidarity forces have been working for many years. Now the party must make the political determination to shore up our political presence in both these locations. Failure to do so will be to the detriment of the party and the U.S. front of the African Revolution. The benefit of this plan is that it enables us to place all our economic work under one umbrella. Although the regions will achieve limited standalone capacity, all our efforts will work under the strategic leadership of our headquarters. Uzi, Zenzele, Uhuru Foods and Pies, Uhuru Bakery and Cafe, Uhuru Furniture Stores, commercial kitchens and marketplaces will all have the benefit of centralized support that make it unnecessary for any institution to depend solely on its own individual capacity. Our economic work will have greater strategic flexibility and resilience whenever attacked by the white ruling class colonial power. History has taught us that once we begin to initiate this regional strategy with determination, we can be certain that we will open up many other doors for advancing our struggle for the total liberation of Africa and all her globally scattered children that constitute our nation. Obviously, this regional strategy is not simply an economic one. This is not a task that the economic development arm of the Office of the Deputy Chair will take on by itself. This is an organization and political strategy as well. It is in the custody of the entire party leadership. The recruitment, let me say this again, because the Deputy Chair has been frowning at all of this stuff that's been dumped in that area. I'm going to say this again. Obviously, this regional strategy is not simply an economic one. This is not a task that the economic development arm of the Office of the Deputy Chair would take on by itself. This is an organizational and political strategy as well. It is in the custody of the entire party leadership. The recruitment and membership arm of the Secretary General will have to work closely with the Office of the Deputy Chair and entire Central Committee to lay out a strategy for recruitment and personnel assignment to meet the requirements of revolutionary party building for the party internationally through our regional development. In addition to the regional party offices, NPDOM must also open up local storefront offices in every region in order to deepen its relationship with the African working class. Like our regional party offices, NPDOM offices should function as outlets for products from the economic enterprises of our party and movement until the local NPDOM branches are capable of opening standalone neighborhood storefronts deep in the working class communities within the African colonies. I don't have time. We have a meeting that's going to be starting here shortly, but this is really important because this is the fight back on a serious way. We're looking at gentrification and the various other intrusions in our community, pushing people out. We can begin a fight back by creating enterprises, even small enterprises inside the African communities within the working class itself. This is what we're doing, and we're not doing it in one place. We're talking about establishing offices everywhere. So locally, the African working class will be able to grow its own capacity. The colonial state knows more or less where we are located. Now the masses upon whom our security and revolutionary success depend need to be able to find us. The existence of local community offices becomes a material, practical evidence of our work. The existence of local community offices become material, practical evidence of our work. The offices become community meeting places for discussing and organizing around the critical questions assaulting our people daily, especially the working class. The burning spear and other party and movement materials can also be acquired at our offices. Political posters in our offices contribute to mass political education by showing our unity with the oppressed peoples of the world and exhibiting our revolutionary credentials. Running and raising the resources to operate local offices and providing community political education will contribute to the ideological organization and political development of party cadre. This is key to our local party forces becoming entrenched in the working class sections of the African colony that are traditionally overlooked by everyone except the colonial state. Our local offices will be the centers of organized resistance. They will be the institutions within which the African working class will organize the implementation of the community gardens for collective efforts to feed our colonized communities. They will be the location for the work to build the African People's Free Child Care Collective, designed to initiate the socialist-inspired struggle for political, economic, and social liberation of working class African women, too many of whom are immobilized by the sole responsibility of raising our children. The offices will become the center for the development of black community control of the police and schools, centered in the leadership of the African working class. The work within our communities and from the local NPDOM and other mass movement offices will function practically as politically directed components of the great cultural revolution that will facilitate our African internationalist global revolution. The offices will also function as fortresses against gentrification. The very presence of conscious anti-colonial Africans who are organized and in constant motion will function to dissuade the North American interlopers from invading our community. In fact, it was the rise of the revolutionary anti-colonial resistance of the 1960s that resulted in the white flight that emptied the inner cities of colonizers at the time. It has only been since the quiet that has descended with the defeat of the black revolution of the 60s that there has been a resurgence of white so-called investors, many of whom are ordinary white colonizers mining for cheap property at the expense of the collective wealth, potential political power, and social cohesion of our colonized communities. The fight against gentrification will also come through the development of party economic institutions and others we inspire throughout the African colony. See, we don't have to do everything. We started, and we will inspire other Africans to do similarly. And people who don't consider themselves revolutionaries, etc., can be inspired. We set the example. That's part of what being the advanced attachment is. That's the point of the spear. The point of the spear is important because it opens the womb. It opens it, and then the shaft, of the spear that carries all the weight is the thing that takes it to the depth that it has to go to. The fight against gentrification will also come through the development of party economic institutions and others we inspire throughout the African colony. Employment and independent economic activity within the African colony will function to push back the vulturistic economic opportunists from the oppressor colonizer population. We will enhance the ability of our people to hold on to properties that are currently vulnerable to white takeovers. Our local community offices will bring organization to our colonized people. The advanced detachment of the African working class, the vanguard of the colonized African nation, concretizes our presence through a direct, immediate integration with the African working class, even as the class is busy struggling to solve the problems imposed on our nation through a hostile foreign and alien state power. In the 2016 plenary political report, we spoke of the role of NPDOM in these defining words, quote, NPDOM is the party's most important connection to the masses of our people. It is the party's instrument for intervening in the mass struggles of our people with revolutionary science. NPDOM is the method through which party cadre can root ourselves among the people and provide leadership for the thousands of Africans who, for any number of reasons, are not members of our party. Since NPDOM is the most dominant mass organization of the party, it stands to reason that NPDOM should lead the pack in establishing local offices throughout the African colony. We will influence and have access to the scores of thousands of African workers within the African colony, whether they are NPDOM members or not. This is what is meant by reserve forces for the revolution. Our development of the party in NPDOM also coincides with the practical revolutionary requirements of the party. Like any other genuine anti-colonial movement, to occupy, develop, and defend territory. Let's go this again. Our development of the party in NPDOM also coincides with the practical revolutionary requirement of the party, like any other genuine anti-colonial movement, to occupy, develop, and defend territory. This includes ideological, political, economic, geographical, and organizational territory. Part of our work is to transform every community in the domestic African colony into citadels or strongholds of the scientific African internationalist worldview. Politically, our communities must become conscious and organized participants in the anti-colonial resistance movement for the immediate defense of our people and communities wherever we are currently located. The 2016 plenary political report was clear that NPDOM must be the primary vehicle for building the presence of the party throughout the colony. And we quote, every member of the party must join NPDOM. And even if our primary work prohibits us from the fullest participation, our membership dues and participation in local meetings will give the organization greater capacity on many levels. NPDOM, understanding itself to be an organization of the party, must be the most zealous distributor of the party's press, especially the Burning Spear, for which it must also supply articles that will facilitate its organizing efforts. Our party leaders must also be cognizant of the role of NPDOM as a major producer of a deep pool of potential party recruits, a reserve force for the revolution, where Africans learn organizations and how to be organized. NPDOM must become the method with which we actually contend with non-proletarian forces for political, ideological, and territorial influence and power. All communities within the colonized African territories must be followers of the Uhuru movement. They must be transformed into anti-colonial bastions of resistance. In the final analysis, we are in a struggle for political power over our own black lives. We will settle for nothing less. NPDOM, perhaps more than any other organization, must exude this determination and the confidence of its achievement, unquote. The NPDOM local offices will reflect the general condition of the community and not the alienating institutions installed in the colony by colonial poverty programs and African petty bourgeois opportunists whose income is dependent on the ongoing impoverished conditions of our people. These will be offices that radiate optimism for the future promised by our presence and the programs of self-reliance and self-determination that we provide. They will become the offices wherein the community may organize their own child care and tutoring programs, and where we can provide immediate cultural upliftment, including African liberatory culture. Our objective is not to simply set up offices and retail shops throughout our communities. This is the part of the decolonization project. This is part of the process of contributing to the further development of concrete dual power that includes the most meaningful capacity to feed, clothe, and house ourselves. Our self-determination, which has been robbed from the African nation since the advent of colonial slavery and capitalism. True liberation cannot be really achieved without neutralizing the economic and political domination by the white nationalist colonial power that controls every aspect of our lives as a subjugated people. True socialism is the conquest of state power and ownership and control of the means of production by the working class. As a party of practical revolutionaries, we are constantly in the process of solving the problems of the revolution and practically implementing our ideological conclusions. This is an example of how our party is the advanced detachment, the vanguard, in the struggle to liberate and unify Africa and the African nation under the leadership of the African working class. The implementation of this regional political economic strategy will raise the struggle for dual power to a higher level. The deployment of party members into their immediate locales will stabilize and dynamize this dual power work. The deployment of party members into their immediate locales will stabilize and dynamize this dual power work in a way that contributes to the transformation of our colonized African communities into fighting anti-colonial Soviets. The distribution of the Branningsfield newspaper will function as the ideological and international informational arm of our community. Our local NPDOM offices will be the people's fortresses against colonial state power in the fight for self-determination, in the fight for genuine anti-colonial democracy. In so doing, we will rapidly escalate the struggle to contend with and ultimately defeat imperialist state power over our lives and resources. Uhuru.
One Africa! One nation! One nation! One Africa! Uhuru! Uhuru, comrades. So if you're online, we are streaming on Facebook as well as YouTube. So if you have questions, comments, anything, please leave them in the comment section right now pertaining to Chapter 6. Is there anyone in the audience who wants to be our first one to ask any questions or make any comments in regards to Chapter 6 today? Uhuru, if you could just come to this mic.
Uhuru, comrades, Uhuru, everybody. Cool to see everybody. Deputy, excuse me. Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate your analysis and report. And I have something that struck me that I really enjoyed hearing. On page 132, on the fourth paragraph, where you talked about a free collective child care. The African people free collective child care, because it's really important. And to hear that's being implemented, and I just wanted more clarity about how that's going to happen, because a lot of us are immobilized because we're raising our children, and we're under enemy occupied territory. So to be able to have a place to bring our children, know that the food is going to be right, knowing that we're learning a different way to do things to be liberated. I just wanted to know if you could just dig into that a little bit.
Uhuru. I appreciate that. And because this is a critical question in our community, and most of the women in here are quite clear on that, and some of the brothers who participate, like with child care also, particularly as single parents, as it's called. And that's another whole other thing that, given an opportunity, we need to be able to talk about. But the fact is that this is not a simple question. It's one that really compromises the mobility of African women. It compromises the economic, the political, and the social mobility of African women. And you cannot overstate the social component of that, because just because you got children don't mean that you don't want to go out sometime and, and enjoy yourself like other women might be doing. It just means that you ain't got no child care, then it's going to be real hard for you to do that. And sometimes we do things, desperate things that get us in trouble, endanger our children and things like that. So, but it's not a really complicated thing. I mean, we've done it in the past. I can talk confidently about this is because we've done it. Because in Oakland, we had an African People's Free Child Care Collective. And we start with, and this is how usually we'll start most places, is that we in the party, in the movement, and sisters with children are in the movement. And they have problems dealing with that, and so we collectivize child care so that it's not just one sister's responsibility to take care of our child 24/7. We get mostly African women, but sometimes African men who are confronted with that contradiction to share it. So you have child care collective. So they share time. So you don't do it 24/7. You do it maybe on Thursdays for such a period of time, and then sister so-and-so does it for this period of time, et cetera. So it gets shared. And we've done that. And not only have we done that, but at the same time we were doing that, we organized actual African People's Free Clinic. We had the Bobby Hutton's Free Clinic, actual mobile center in Oakland, California. And we had something like 40 volunteer healthcare workers who would come and give healthcare examinations to the children. We had people who would come in and teach children Swahili and even French on one occasion. We had one little 4 or 5-year-old girl who could count to 50 in Swahili. I mean, these are things that we were able to do. It just got really complicated when I asked for it to be done subsequently because this real sort of bureaucratic structure skyscraper started emerging, and so what it meant was that you never could get to taking care of children because you were building this kind of edifice. And I'm saying that our Uhuru House in Oakland, where we did it, was different. It was structured different and a number of other things, but it means that we'll have to get a church, just like the free breakfast for school children program of the Panthers was able to get churches in the community where this breakfast programs could happen. We have to get a church. We have to get some other kind of institutions in our community to make themselves available. The Child Care Collective didn't just keep children, provide education, but also they organized to get resources so the children could be fed. I mean, this is what happened on a regular basis. I know that's how it has to happen. It starts, we have to, even in our own ranks, we need to look around and see if we can win some unity with people who have this real compelling, this real profound contradiction to organize, to collectively, let's deal with it. And we'll knock out all the because there's going to be contradictions, but there ain't nothing to it but to do it. And that's what, to go ahead and start it, and we'll find out the problems and the solutions in the process of trying to carry that program out. Uhuru, Brother Jihad, Uhuru. Yeah. Uhuru. Yes, sir.
Presentation for everybody. I had a question. So, first of all, I think the program is dynamite, 1,000%. Wanted to ask you to comment maybe on some of the lessons learned from the Black Panther Party, because we had so many of those programs internationally also, as you know, and the lock-in with the community. We had chapters all across the United States. And you know the reasons for our demise.
Sure.
I just wanted you to expound on how can we capitalize off of some of those lessons so history doesn't repeat itself in that regard.
Well, that's an interesting question because the Panthers, who was, as I said, at one occasion, nobody can doubt that the Panthers represent the Revolutionary Center. Not only, by the way, for the African Revolution, but for other revolutionary formations in this country and other places. I was just talking to some place. We've just begun to start doing work in Australia. And I was just talking to someone who was talking about how the comrade was saying, there used to be Panthers offices right there in Australia as well, and in India, et cetera. So they was extraordinarily influential. But a difference was that the Panthers depended on donations and contributions from different enterprises in order to, like they had the free shoe program and other things like that. In fact, Huey P. Newton did a piece called Re-Examining Black Capitalism or something like that, that made the assumption that because all of the resources they were getting for these programs came from this white corporations and stuff like that, that they need to really relook black capitalism and to get them to come, the resource to come from black capitalists, or what they call black capitalists, because they know really, that creature doesn't really exist. And we say, no, what has to happen is the working class has to have its own capacity. Doesn't rely on the white capitalists or the so-called black capitalists. And what we're doing is creating institutions that generate resources in the community, not simply will become and give stuff to the African population. That doesn't create self-determination. It creates a reliance on the institution that's given things to people. We expect to win people to support us because we came and gave them something. And we've learned from our own experience what a real contradiction that is for us. I think that we can do certain kinds of programs that we know we are hungry people in our community, and we can set up centers where people can come and eat for free on such a days. But our objective is to give people the capacity to begin to feed ourselves. And that's the projects that we're involved in now. That's the struggle that we're involved in. It's a lot more complicated, but I believe that it's a lot more significant in actually people overturning colonial domination. And you can overturn colonial domination, and because when you say colonial domination, you're talking about the subjugation of an entire nation. And in the nation, even the petty bourgeoisie is subjugated, even though it's better off than everybody else. But what has to happen is that the working class has to actually achieve political power. And so that's a difference. That's a difference. And it's one that I'm extremely conscious of. But I'm glad you raised the question, because the Panthers did, they had, I think the free breakfast program, that was extraordinary. I think the sickle cell anemia program, that was extraordinary. But in terms of economic development, that didn't occur within the Black Panther Party. And that's what we have to do as a part of the whole anti-colonial project. And partially because in the 1960s, we were extraordinarily prejudiced. This whole notion of making money. We were seriously prejudiced by that. But somebody had money that we were getting to carry out. And I'm saying the working class can have those resources itself. And that's a fundamental difference. I'm still really prejudiced about the whole money question. I mean, I have to be pushed and shoved. But I'm learning a lot myself. Because we have to be self-reliant. I mean, sometimes, we can consider welfare socialism. And it ain't socialism, it's dependency. And the African nation we have to have this deep struggle among ourselves to overcome dependency and a willingness to even function as dependent. I shook my head when I talked about the thing about African women having sole responsibility for child care, because that's an assault also on the tradition and structure of our communities, because this whole notion of a single mother or even a family, single family having responsibility, isolated responsibility for children, that's crazy. That's never been something we've ever done. And it's been a community enterprise, and that's what we have to make happen again. But a community enterprise has to generate resources. It's not just going to happen like manna from heaven or something like that. And it has to do it under the leadership of the working class that creates value for everybody except ourselves. Uhuda. I hope that was helpful, comrade. Uhuda.
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to appreciate the political education. It was a part where you talked about...
Can you get to the mic better?
Yeah. It was a part where you said it's the African working class that's always under assault. And I appreciated that part because it speaks to the strategy of colonial domination, where you take a valuable people and then you exploit them for what they can produce, and you make them feel like it's their fault that they're in the struggle that they're in.
Yeah.
And that prolongs the inevitable demise of capitalism. Because capitalism, you know, like you said, the ruling class knows that capitalism is not an infinite social system. They're aware that it's going to fall eventually. So if you demoralize the people that you're dominating, that prolongs that process. And yeah, that speaks to the part where you said that the future can be ours if we believe it. And so it's a matter of not listening to the oppressor. You know, you can't trust somebody that's enslaved you. You know, that still enslaves you now.
Yeah.
You can't trust what they tell you about yourself. And so that's it.
But let me tell you something. I think that's a really important statement. I think what is also extremely important is that the capitalists don't expect to ever die. Generally speaking, they can only rule because they'll see their rule as just and permanent. Because they will be in a state of deep anxiety all the time if they didn't understand, if they didn't think their rule was permanent. And for it to be permanent, they have to have convinced themselves that it's a just rule. Increasingly, that is difficult for them to do. It's difficult. They can't even justify what they do. It's difficult now. And it's also difficult to believe that it's permanent, that increasingly they are seeing some of the handwriting on the wall. And that's what pushes them into these desperate acts that you don't, if you think you got all the power, you're not afraid of somebody else talking. I mean, in fact, that's what, when I was growing up, they used to talk about America was such great and, you know, free speech, everybody can say what they think, etc. And they would say stuff like, unpopular speech is the speech that deserves freedom more than anything else. But now what they've come up is they tell you that people are radicalized by what they hear on the internet, and you can't, so somehow the notion of free speech is, that's absurd. They would say that you got free speech. They would call it free speech, but they would place all kinds of limitations on it. They say you free. You're in a cell, but you're free. You can do any damn thing you want to in that cell. You understand? And that's freedom. And that's what they have done. They've constructed this whole thing, about they're afraid of even people to say, you don't do that. If you know you got all the power, you don't care what anybody's saying. It's just when you are on shaky foundation and experience yourself on a shaky foundation. If somebody in North St. Louis can say something that threatens and the power of government with more guns than any force on the planet Earth, if they have to shoot somebody in St. Louis from walking on the street, they can't have any freedom of expression. Political expression, and expression happens in 1,000 different ways, not just what you say, what you do, an act of defiance, etc. That's a statement about how shaky they see themselves being. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Uhuru, I just really want to appreciate this political education, this chapter especially. Recently, maybe like a year or two ago, there was this video by this, not a brother, a black person, named Killer Mike. And he was talking about how, African people aren't ready for revolution. We don't know how to fish. We don't know how to sew. We don't know how to build a house and all of this crap. And then here comes, chairman and deputy chair showing that we know and we can do everything. And, how you laid out, what he was talking about was not, what the limitations of the African nation, or especially not of the African working class that know how to do this, all these things. It was the limitations of the black petty bourgeoisie that don't know how to fish, don't want to sew, don't want to work, don't want to do any of those things. So it's the black petty bourgeoisie that's not ready for a revolution, and we've been known that, So I just really appreciate this chapter. It's extremely liberating and empowering, and I'm ready for the Black Power blueprint for our own spaceship to Mars and shit. I'm just so excited. Uhuru.
You can't go there because Trump's got a space force. But I do think that it's important because usually every class sees the world from its own position. And the African petty bourgeoisie is a tiny social force. And it has no confidence in anything the ordinary African who's tussling with the police every day. Every day in these communities, Africans are dealing with the cops, and they have to know how to deal with the cops in order to survive and what have you. But African petty bourgeois, so they ain't scared of the police. They run from the police, they duck the police, they're maneuvering all the time, but the African petty bourgeoisie is terrified. It cannot visualize being able to win, but these Africans know they can win because they're just how they deal with them as individuals on a regular basis in our communities and what have you. So the African petty bourgeoisie speaks from its own class base and its own sense of weakness and powerlessness as a social force. Only time the African petty bourgeoisie talk tough is when the mass of black people rise up and then they can say, we, you understand? Speaking off the power of the African working class. And the only time we suffer this doubt and stuff is when we have been convinced by the African petty bourgeoisie. Because I saw the power on Canfield Drive myself in the African working class before the Negro students and other petty bourgeois forces came and hijacked that revolution. Yes, sister. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman.
Uhuru, sister Naya.
You mentioned that true liberation cannot be obtained until the economic system of colonialism that dominates our lives is neutralized. Can you please expound on that, particularly as it relates to natural resources such as water, electricity, and things that we as Africans need supplied to our communities?
Yeah, that's a good question. It follows, I think, really importantly on the back of the other comment that was just made. Because Congo alone has enough water to electrify much of the whole world. But Congo don't control that water, don't control nothing. And all the resources that exist on the continent of Africa, just think about this. Africa contains at least 30% of the mineral resources, known resources of the planet Earth. At least a third of them are located in Africa. That's part of how we're going to win, because the majority of titanium, the coltan, other kinds of things that are actually fundamental for this entire thing to operate. They're in Africa, but they're in white power hands. Take it. And what you got is a collapse of economic interests all over, not just Europe, but the whole capitalist world will suffer mightily as a consequence of the successful struggle of African people. So the water, we already have it. In terms of what we know how to do, and the petty bourgeoisie saying you can't do this, can't do that, we're the ones who've already done it. We've always done it. If there were no Africans doing the fishing and the farming and all this stuff, there wouldn't be no food and et cetera. I mean, we have already done that. At least that has been historically the case. There's an intrusion on our capacity to do this kind of stuff by the international bourgeoisie today, so that even in places like Africa, peasants are losing skills for growing food and things because the imperialist powers have limited the amount of resources that can come to these places. Instead, now they're bringing these trucks with the blue helmeted guys, call themselves the United Nations, throwing off bleached flour, so the people now getting bleached flour that's coming from U.S. corporations that get purchased and making money on that end, and the people, eventually you can lose your skills that you have. When at the end of slavery, Africans were the only ones. We were the carpenters, we were the mechanics, we were the ones who knew how to do everything. White people didn't know how to do nothing. And then what happened is they capture your skills, and they create unions. What do they call them? Anyway, they are something like unions that prevent African people from being able to participate unless you have been certified by them. So you lose your skills to do it, and the white people are the only ones who know how to do it on a certain level. So the skills, generally speaking, are in our community capacity. Right here, the Africans, not a single white person worked on this building. Africans mostly, and then some Mexicans worked on this building. So the capacity is in our community. Growing food is in our communities. We know how to do it. Africans don't like growing food no more because we've been made so shameful of sharecropping and all this other kind of stuff. But you go in any neighborhood, you'll find old Africans know how to grow food in the communities that we're living in, et cetera. So we have that capacity. The thing, it has to be organized, and it has to be informed by the interests of our people. Uhuru. Yeah.
Uhuru. So we are winding down. However, there was one question online, and it pertained, just in terms of what the question is, in terms of deepening, about the African manufacturing and the factories and everything, because this person seems like they're ready. They're saying, where is the African manufacturing headquarters going to be, and how do we apply to work there? So,
You can apply to help construct it.
yes,
That's what you're really gonna have to do.
yes.
'Cause it ain't ready-made, you gotta help construct it. And, but you should get in touch. I mean, I guess how to be in touch with us is probably manifest on something that they're watching right now. isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so, Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Where's that person located at?
They didn't say.
Okay.
Yeah, we can ask. If Yolanda on Facebook, let us know where you're located. Uhuru.
All right, comment. So where are we now? I know, do we have announcements or something?
Yes.
Before we shut it down? I want to thank everybody for being here. We do this again next Sunday at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and I don't know where I'll be. So.
Uhuru. All right, Uhuru. This study was brought to you by the African People's Socialist Party's Department of Agitation and Propaganda. Committed to winning the war of ideas, you can take this knowledge on the go and get your world news by visiting theburningspear.com. For more information about the African People's Socialist Party, please visit apspuhuru.org. Economic development means building black power. That's what we just read today. The African-led Black Power Blueprint Project is transforming our neighborhoods from blighted to beautiful. Renovating dilapidated buildings is part of a comprehensive strategy by the African People's Education and Defense Fund and Black Star Industries to win economic and political self-determination in the black community. The Freedom Choir is calling for black singers and musicians to bring your skills to a revolutionary black power community choir. The Freedom Choir is based in St. Petersburg, Florida, but is making a national call to join the Freedom Mass Choir. The biggest performance this year will be to perform at the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. Rehearsals are held via live stream for all participants who are not in St. Petersburg, Florida. For more information or to sign up for the Freedom Choir, send an email to blackpowerchoir@gmail.com or call 727-537-6736. Today, August 12th, the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations will be hosting its second day to its annual conference themed There Is No Peace, Africa and Africans Are at War, U.S. to the World, Comply or Die. If you're in St. Louis, Missouri, we're at 4101 West Florissant Avenue. Registration, it's open. It's a free event, so you guys can come. The program will begin at 10 a.m. today. The African People's Socialist Party will be hosting its 7th Congress, October 6th through the 12th, themed Vanguard, the Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution. The 7th Congress will be taking place in St. Louis, Missouri, and registration is open at apsp-congress.org. Start planning your vacation now and get ready to attend the Marcus Garvey Legacy Cruise, taking place December 9th through the 16th. The destinations are Mahogany Bay, Belize, and Cozumel, Mexico. This cruise serves as a fundraiser for the African Socialist International, and first deposits can be made at uhurulegacycruise.org. We want to appreciate you for tuning in to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study. This will conclude the show, and we want to invite you back with us next Sunday. And for all of our listeners on Black Power 96, don't forget to tune in right now to Florida Blind Boy coming up next. Uhuru, thank you all so much.
Africa.
Israel too. Uhuru.